There's a specific category of security concern that has become more common in recent years, and that deserves careful discussion. The category involves vulnerabilities in operating systems or major platforms, where the discovery of the vulnerability is public, the technical details are understood, and yet the vendor's communication about the vulnerability is incomplete, evasive, or unclear. The vendor may acknowledge that something happened. The vendor may provide a patch, but the specific explanation of what the vulnerability was, how it arose, how long it existed, who may have been affected, and what specific conditions could trigger exploitation is not fully provided. This pattern is visible across multiple vendors in the current software industry, but it has been particularly noticeable in Microsoft's handling of specific Windows vulnerabilities over the last several years. I want to walk through a specific example that has come to attention recently, discuss what Microsoft has and has not said about it, explain what the specific concerns are from a security perspective, and describe what the implications are for users who depend on Windows for their computing. Let me start by describing the specific vulnerability and what is known about it. The vulnerability I am discussing is a specific issue in the Windows implementation of certain cryptographic operations that has been reported through responsible disclosure channels, has received a CVE identifier, and has been the subject of published security advisories. The specific technical details, at the level of what the bug is and how it manifests, have been publicly discussed by security researchers who have examined the patch that Microsoft released. The discussion in the security community has produced a general understanding of what the bug was, though the specific details of Microsoft's internal handling of the bug have not been fully disclosed. The bug involves a specific incorrect handling of certain cryptographic operations that, under specific conditions, could allow an attacker to compromise the integrity of specific system processes. The specific conditions required for exploitation are narrow but not impossible, and the specific impact, under successful exploitation, is serious. The patch that Microsoft released addresses the bug, and users who have applied the patch are not vulnerable to this specific issue. What has been less clear in Microsoft's communication is several things. The first is how long the bug existed before it was discovered. The patch notes and the security advisory do not specify the specific introduction of the bug, and the specific code history is not publicly available because Windows is closed source. Security researchers examining the patch have attempted to estimate the age of the bug based on the specific code being patched, but the estimates are uncertain. The second is how Microsoft discovered or was notified about the bug. The specific disclosure channel is not clear from the public communication. It is not clear whether the bug was found internally by Microsoft's security team, was reported by an external researcher, was detected through exploitation in the wild, or was discovered through some other channel. The specific discovery circumstances matter because they inform whether the bug had been exploited before the patch was issued. The third is whether the bug had been exploited by any specific parties before the patch was issued. Microsoft's security advisories typically indicate whether a bug was being actively exploited at the time of the patch, using specific categories like exploitation detected, or exploitation more likely, or exploitation less likely. For this specific bug, the indication was ambiguous, and the subsequent discussion has not clarified whether there were specific exploitations. The fourth is what specific systems were affected. The advisory listed the affected Windows versions, but the specific affected configurations, the specific contexts in which the bug was exploitable, and the specific user populations who were at highest risk were not fully described. The fifth is why the bug existed in the first place. This is the hardest question because it requires Microsoft to describe its internal development and review processes, and Microsoft has generally been reticent about such details. The specific question of what went wrong in the development process and what has been done to prevent similar issues in the future is the question that users and security researchers most want answered, and that is least often answered publicly. The pattern of incomplete communication is not specific to this one bug. Over the last several years, various Windows security issues have followed a similar pattern. A vulnerability is disclosed, Microsoft issues a patch. The public communication describes the vulnerability at a high level. The specific questions about the bug's history, discovery, and significance are not fully addressed. The security community fills in as many of the details as it can through public reverse engineering of the patches, but some details remain unclear. The specific concern about this pattern is several. The first concern is that users who need to make informed decisions about their security posture cannot do so without complete information. A user who is deciding whether to prioritize a specific patch, whether to change their usage patterns, or whether to consider alternative platforms benefits from knowing the specific risk that the vulnerability posed. Incomplete information makes these decisions harder. The second concern is that the incomplete communication may reflect incomplete internal understanding, or incomplete internal response. If Microsoft itself does not know exactly how long a bug existed or how it was discovered or whether it was exploited, this is itself a concern about Microsoft's security practices. A mature security organization has visibility into these questions. The third concern is that the pattern is inconsistent with the closed source model that Microsoft has chosen. Closed source means that the code is not publicly available for independent review. The implicit bargain is that Microsoft, as the custodian of the code, will take responsibility for its security. When specific security incidents arise, Microsoft is the party that can provide authoritative information. If Microsoft's public communication is incomplete, the users who chose to use closed source software are dependent on a vendor that is not fully transparent about the security situation. The fourth concern is the specific trust implications. Users who trust Microsoft to handle security responsibly are placing substantial trust in the company. The trust is justified or not justified based on the company's actual practices. When specific incidents suggest that the actual practices are less rigorous than the trust would require, the question of whether the trust is justified is an active question for users to consider. For comparison, the open source software ecosystem handles similar situations differently in some specific respects. When a security vulnerability is found in open source software, the specific patch is visible. The specific code that was changed can be examined. The specific history of the code can be reviewed through the version control system. The specific decisions and discussions that led to the bug and to its fix are often visible in public records. The specific security situation can be reconstructed by any interested party. This is not to say that open source software is always handled perfectly. Specific open source projects have had their own issues with security communication. But the structural availability of the information, which is a feature of the open source model, provides a baseline of transparency that closed source models do not provide. For users who value transparency about the security of their computing environment, the specific implications are worth considering. Open source operating systems, including Linux distributions, provide more transparency about security issues than closed source operating systems do. The specific code is available, the specific patches are visible, the specific discussions are public. The users who want to understand the security of their system have the information available to do so. This does not mean that Linux is more secure than Windows in some absolute sense. Both platforms have vulnerabilities. Both platforms have patch cycles. Both platforms have issues that have to be disclosed and addressed. The specific difference is not in whether there are vulnerabilities, but in whether the handling of the vulnerabilities is transparent. For users who have already chosen their platform and do not intend to change, the specific implications of the transparency difference are limited. They can note that their chosen vendor's communication is incomplete and can factor that into their trust calculations. They can continue to use the platform with awareness of the specific trust situation. For users who are considering platform choices, the transparency difference is one of several factors that might inform their decision. The specific weight to give this factor is a judgment call. Some users weight transparency heavily. Others weight other factors more heavily. The specific choice depends on the user's values and circumstances. The broader observation is that software vendors have significant power over the computing experience of their users, and the specific communication practices that vendors follow are a reflection of how they understand that power and their obligations to users. Vendors that communicate fully, including about security issues, are taking a specific position about their relationship with users. Vendors that communicate incompletely are taking a different position. Users who are aware of these different positions can choose to do business with the vendors whose positions align with their preferences. Subscribe for the next video, which covers the specific history of Windows security disclosures over the last several years, and the specific patterns that have emerged in Microsoft's communication. And in the comments, tell me how you evaluate software vendor security communication, and what specific standards you hold vendors to. The specific expectations of users are what ultimately shape vendor practice, and the aggregate expectations of many users matter more than the expectations of any one user.